Oh. Good evening. Welcome to the final session of Keeping It Together. This is going to be, I hope, at least quite a creative and helpful, practical session on how we kind of go about the difficult task of listening to each other and being of a mind to create unity and reconciliation. What I thought we could do to start tonight is begin with a prayer, which I actually think is actually a pretty important one for right now. The Serenity Prayer, which some of you may know from a 12-step context, but it's actually a part of a prayer that's much longer and was written by a notable German theologian called Niebuhr very many years ago. And I think it kind of expresses many of the things that we need right now in particularly the post-election environment. So let's pray this. I will lead us. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. That prayer has been on my mind in the last few days because, if there's anything that we cannot change, it's all the stuff to do with the election and who's won and what happens now and what's going to pan out in the next few weeks and months. We can't even vote now. All we can do is accept the things we cannot change, and just that that practice of accepting what we can't change, I think frees us from a lot of the anxiety and the anger that we often feel when we're talking about this particular topic. So I just thought we would start with that. A couple of weeks ago, you remember that we looked at this concept that I described as the post-truth world. We saw that truth was really having a bad spell, and it had been having a bad spell for really some time. And there was a change in society's attitude to the truth. Politicians in the good old days used to try to avoid telling absolute whoppers. At times, they would. You can think clearly of examples where a politician in the old days told just a whopping barefaced lie. Bill Clinton, under oath, for example, I did not have sex with that woman, an absolute lie. But there seemed to be in those days a kind of acceptance that you tried not to lie. You kind of hid the truth beneath some fancy words or a selection of phrases, which, while not actually a lie, did intend to mislead people. And when the stakes get really high, as it was for Clinton in that moment, his career's on the line, his marriage is on the line, then the politician will resort to the barefaced lie. That's partly because we kind of all saw things the same way. There was a unified media. There were half a dozen media outlets. They were all, attempting to be fairly impartial. So they all reported the same thing. They all understood what the facts were. They agreed on the facts, even if, their own particular readership or viewership wanted them to put a little bit of certain perspective on it. The facts themselves were all agreed. That's not the case now, though, of course. And now the concept of truth is so flexible that politicians can just make stuff up. In the middle of an interview or on a platform as they're giving a speech. There are no such things as lies. There's no such things as truth. If you say what you believe or say is the truth and you keep saying it and you don't deviate from it, then the echo chamber that you inhabit will pick it up, authenticate it, emphasize it, and it will become true for all the occupants of that echo chamber. And when you have one big echo chamber over here with one set of truth and another big echo chamber over here with a very different set of truth, then everyone's left thinking, well, is there actually anything that is true? Is it not all just a matter of perspective? So morality no longer is a consideration when it comes to what politicians say. I'm generalizing, of course, but generally I think that's true. So this is a sorry situation, I think, because as Christians and also as thinking rational people, we have to say that, there are truths. It is true whether something is X, Y, or Z, and we as Christians who are politically engaged and thoughtful, must resist the temptation of just living within our own echo chamber where we get something, a version of reality, which may or may not be 100% objectively true, but we accept it as that. And maybe dipping into the other echo chamber from time to time just to see what's going on over there. You actually get quite a shock if you're used to one kind of aquarium where you breathe this water and then suddenly you're dumped in another aquarium it's very disorienting, and you can think, well, is this even the same planet? This is so different, what's being said here and what people think of as being true. So that's where we got to last time out. It would be foolish and frankly unrealistic not to just spend a couple of moments reflecting on what's gone on in the last week. The last week has been traumatic for very many people. Quite possibly the entire country has had cause for feeling traumatized. I suspect everybody at some point in the last week has felt anger, confusion, joy, hurt. And I suspect if you are on Facebook, at some point in the last week, you have unfriended at least one person, because the last week has not provided the kind of clarity that we were all kind of hoping for. So here are a couple of lengthy passages that I've read this week. The first is by George Packer in The Atlantic. He wrote this a day or two after last Tuesday. We don't yet know the outcome of the election, but its meaning is already clear. We are two countries, and neither of them is going to be conquered or disappear anytime soon. The outcome of the 2016 election was not a historical fluke or result of foreign subversion, but a pretty accurate reflection of the American electorate. Many of the most influential journalists and pollsters continue to fail to understand how most of their compatriots think, even as these experts spend ever more of their time talking with one another on Twitter and in TV studios. The local and regional newspapers around the country that could fill in the picture of who we are with more granular human detail continue to die out. All of us, professionals and otherwise, are to some extent prisoners of impermeable information chambers in which the effort to grasp contrary narratives is morally suspect. The destruction of the mental commons is potentially fatal to a democracy. There's no escaping who we Americans have become. This is the election's meaning. We are stuck with one another, seeing no way out and no apparent way through, sinking deeper into a state of mutual incomprehension and loathing. The possible exits, gradual de-escalation, majority breakthrough, clean separation, civil war, are either unlikely or unthinkable. We have to live and govern ourselves together, but we still don't know how. Whoever takes the presidency, all Americans will remain the losers. And Ian Bremner, who is a foreign affairs expert in Time magazine, wrote this. Regardless of the way the final presidential tally shakes out, one thing is increasingly clear. There is no advanced industrial democracy more politically divided than the US is today. Trump's overperformance in the election relative to poll expectations solidifies that fact and makes clear that the divisions in the US electorate are more structural and ingrained than many political pundits had hoped heading into November. Regardless of who ends up being sworn in as US president, that means more dysfunctional US politics at home and a weaker US international presence when compared with that of the past 50 years. On the domestic front, expect arguments over political processes and policy issues like free trade and immigration to continue raging and to divide the country. Social media will also continue to drive the polarization of Americans of all political stripes. That dysfunction at home will in turn make it difficult for the US to lead by example on vital issues like tech regulation and climate change, or to face China with a united front on tough issues like trade and security. The world was looking for a statement election from the US. It got one. Expect the next 4 years of US politics at home and abroad to look more like the past 4 rather than the past 50. Well, isn't that depressing? No, really, isn't it? I thought, and this is like the third point here, this is me, I thought that things would be better today. After all the news media, left, right, and centre, unanimously called the election for one candidate, things would be better than they are. But no, we have instead further proof that we are still irreconcilably at loggerheads. The Politico Morning Consult survey yesterday said that 70% of Republicans don't believe the 2020 election was free and fair. Now, that's a shockingly high number. If Mr. Trump is successful in overturning the election results in those small number of states where that will influence the Electoral College, and is himself, Mr. Trump, re-sworn in on January the 20th, then forget 70% of Republicans not believing the election was free and fair. You will have 100% of Democrats saying the same thing. So either way, whatever happens in the next 2 months, tens of millions of people will believe the president is not legitimate. Just as we've had for the last 4 years, because of the influence of Russia in, through Facebook and other means, influencing people's opinions. And just as we had for the 8 years before that, because of the birtherism conspiracy that, Obama was not born in the US. So we've arrived at this place in American politics where it doesn't matter who's elected, there is going to be a sizable proportion of the population that does not believe they are legitimate. This time, though, I think it is slightly different and slightly worse than the Russia thing and the birther thing, because we're now at a point where a very large number of people are saying that the actual vote has been infiltrated by people of ill will who are either discarding legitimate ballots or adding fraudulent ballots. And so the entire process is bust if those people are correct. This is, I don't know whether you've actually kind of got your head around this, but just how serious a problem that is. If it is the case that our entire democracy is that broken, then what does this mean for the future? And what does it mean for the rest of the world as they look at the nation, which is supposed to be, the candle bearer when it comes to the democratic process? We are supposed to be the gold standard. Somebody wrote to me this afternoon to say, vis-a-vis tonight's topic, if a donkey and elephant walked into a bar, it would end with the bar burning down. Which, congratulations to you, the lady who said that. I thought it was very funny. So, just to put the final tin lid on what we've just experienced, and what we're going to experience in the next 2 months. This is a really interesting little segue, I think. This helps us move from the election into our own lives and our own circle of friends and family. It's in the book Brave Talk by Melody Stanford Martin, and much of this evening's content is taken from this book. Someone told me that they had bought this, which I'm really pleased about. Stanford Martin presents ways in which we do not fight fair. Okay, and there are some excellent things here. 10 devices we use when we're having conversations, discussions, arguments. 10 devices that are not fair but are always used. So I kind of wonder, did you spot any of these in the general election campaign? I bet you spotted all of them. The first one, she says, is my neighbor Kathy. So this is using a single instance to represent a global rule or norm. For example, my neighbor Kathy, she's got an uncle that lives in Canada, and he got sick and had to wait in a corridor in the hospital for a week before anybody saw him, because that's what happens in a state-run health service, unlike ours. All right, and you can say just as equally about some other thing that the political opposite of that. One situation does not make a rule. 2 + 2 equals pickles. This is what Stanford Martin calls, jumping to conclusions that take pieces of evidence from, different places and claim the conclusion that the evidence doesn't actually support. Like, let's think of an example. Okay, crime is falling in cities. That's a fact. You can prove that statistically. The ownership of guns is rising nationally. Therefore, the reduction in crime is due to there being more guns available. Now, that might be true. It might not be true, but there is no obvious link between those two facts. But somebody might argue that, and I'm not being anti-gun here. That might actually be the case, that the guns are bringing down crime. And if you believe that, then I respect that. I'm just using that as an example of two things that are true, but actually are possibly completely unrelated, and yet that's what's brought out as an argument. The reverse of that is pickles equals 2 + 2. So instead of jumping to conclusions, this is taking a conclusion and assuming causes that aren't necessarily the case. Oh, look, there's a chicken. Now, this pitfall is about bringing up something that doesn't relate to the argument at all, but pretending that it does. The faulty flashlight. Now, this is when someone shines a light only on the pieces of evidence that support their argument and ignore important pieces of evidence that undermine it. And, favorite occupation of all politicians. The stick figure. This is where you represent your opponent's argument in a simplified and extreme way so that it's easier to defeat. Let's think of a non-controversial example. I can't think of any non-controversial examples. Something like, Trump wants to ban all immigrants. Okay, it's not true, but it's much easier to argue against than what the truth is. And similarly, Biden has a policy of open borders that lets anybody in. Again, it's not true, but it's easier to argue against than what the reality of his policy is. Then there's the black hole. And this is saying something that must be true because it's never been disproven. Okay, so take the trickle-down effect. Give tax cuts to the rich and everybody else will become richer. Is that true? Has that ever actually been proven? I don't think it has. And certainly when you look at people's real standard of income since 1980, there's evidence to suggest that that isn't true. But it's often said, about all sorts of issues that, just because something hasn't been proven or hasn't been disproven, it is therefore true. Either or glasses. This is where something has to be either one way or the other without anything in between. So either we have to have fully state-owned and run health service with hospitals and being owned by the government and doctors and nurses being employed by the government, or you have, what we have now, where the health service is essentially, run by insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies, and there's nothing else. There's no other option. It's either one or the other, which of course is far from the truth. Imaginary dominoes. This is like, okay, well, if this occurs, then a whole bunch of bad things are also going to occur as a direct consequence. So New Jersey legalizing recreational use of marijuana means that the use of heroin and crack cocaine are going to increase. Now, there's no evidence to suggest that that's true, but that's the kind of like the wedge, like, oh, this is just the thin end, and if we let this happen, then much, much worse is going to happen as a result. And then what Stanford Martin delightfully calls big meanie head. So this is where, okay, everything's off the table now, and it's no longer about arguing about issues. This is just about name calling, labeling, personal attacks. Issues are irrelevant. And you may have noticed that once or twice in the presidential election. So let's get really practical. You've got a disagreement with someone. This could be over politics, but it could be over religion. It could be over who's got the greatest baseball stadium in the country. It could be over whose turn it is to take out the garbage this week. So it could be your family, your circle of friends, in your workplace, but the same principles apply to all areas of conflict, I believe. Some of this is Stanford Martin, some of this is me in these 7 principles. And here's perhaps the biggest and most important. Relationship is more important than resolution. Okay, it's nice to come to a resolution where we all agree, but if we don't, that's not actually the most important thing. Being in relationship is more important than agreement. All right, so reaching the end and saying, honey, I don't agree with you, and I don't think I'm ever going to agree with you on this, but I still love you, and I don't want this to be something that gets between us. Find what Stanford calls the iron calm. So that's a thing, that is a place that is deep within you. And it's the place that's very hard to find when your amygdala is racing at 100 miles an hour and you're in fight and flight mode. But it is essential if we are going to remain in constructive relationship with the people that we're talking with. So stepping back, counting to 10 or whatever it is you do, centering, creating stillness, detaching from your emotion as much as you can. That's really where she's pointing to, finding the iron calm. Now, she makes a distinction between courageous dialogue and civil discourse. Civil discourse, she doesn't have a very positive view of that, really. She thinks it's all about, abiding by rules of propriety. It's Robert's Rules of Order. You know, you're not allowed to say this, you are allowed to say that. And that can be quite stifling and limiting, and it very rarely produces harmony. Okay, so, you know, one side of the parliamentary chamber will win and the other side will lose, and it'll all be done in a seemly, orderly way. But at the end of the day, what you've got is winners and losers, and each is going to be scarred by that. So a courageous dialogue, on the other hand, is focusing on the person beneath the words and allowing for their emotional and experiential expression. All right, which brings freedom and hospitality. It honors dignity. It shares power. And it says, I am willing to be uncomfortable with things I don't like in order to hear you. Not in order to argue with your argument, but to hear you and validate you. Be the first to leap. I think this is really good. Like, and the metaphor here is a trapeze. You know, somebody's got to let go of the trapeze first. And for that second, they're in midair and they don't know if the person on the other trapeze is going to reach them in time before they start to fall. So it's a very scary thing to do, but taking the initiative is always good. To me, I always say that, you know, the person who should take the initiative first is me. When I look at it in another environment where I'm not involved, I think there's a sound principle that the first person to take the initiative should be the powerful one. Because the powerless one or the less powerful one will find it very hard to make themselves more vulnerable. The powerful person should be the first person to make themselves vulnerable. So that's why, you know, when you have a fight with your kids, you should be the one that tries to make up and apologize first before insisting that the child does. Have what Stanford calls a quest conversation that involves, you know, digging and searching and trying to find where the person is, trying to find their heart, asking questions, showing empathy. Never underestimate the power of an apology. An apology is liberating. When somebody comes to me in a pastoral context and talks to me about the conflict they're having, even if I think they are 99% in the right and the other person is being almost completely unreasonable, my advice to them will always be, what can you apologize for? Because actually, you know, no one's behavior in conflict is 100% perfect, and anybody can find something to apologize for. So translate this to the political conversation with your family around the Thanksgiving table. If you are a President Trump supporter, how about actually saying, look, yeah, you know, at times in the last 4 years, my guy did do and say some things which were unacceptable. And I'm sorry about that. That is a liberating thing to say. And if you're on the other side of the table around the imaginary Thanksgiving dinner, you can say, well, you know, yeah, actually CNN, you know, they have actually been biased at times. They have sort of taken small things that didn't really mean much and blow them up into, you know, another reason why we should hate the president. And in as much as I watch CNN, I'm sorry about that. This really does have the power to liberate and to bring people together. And Number 7, give credit where it's due. Everyone's argument has some truth in it. Everyone's argument is based on some kind of logic or fact or grievance or pain, even if it is not 100% pure, there's still something in there. So find out why that person is passionate. Try to understand where their energy is coming from, and acknowledge the kernel of truth that they have. So, saying things like, I actually agree with you on that point, or, that's an excellent point. I hadn't thought of it that way. Or I didn't realize that was the case. Thank you for informing me. Or they're sharing something about their experience, and you say, you listen to it, and that sounds like a really tough thing to go through. I can see how it might have affected the way you see things. I don't agree, but I can see now how that would make sense, and thank you for explaining. There are, according to Stanford Martin, 2 enemies of transforming conflict. So two things that prevent us from changing the conflict into something creative. One is domination, and she calls it the enemy of community. And this is what domination looks like. In the business world, it looks like chasing profits to the exclusion of ethics and the needs of local communities. In the parenting world, it looks like overpowering a child and seeking to break their will. In gender relationships, it looks like one partner overtly exerting power or passively aggressively manipulating. I'm not going to say that one of those is generally a masculine way of doing things, and the other one a feminine way. But in families, mothers and fathers, they do exert their domination in subtly different ways, I think. Domination in religion looks like manipulative proselytizing. Domination in the justice system looks like imprisoning for years people over minor non-violent offenses. And as this is topical, I don't know how you voted on the measure about legalizing marijuana. Maybe you're feeling unhappy that passed. Maybe you're feeling happy that it passed. But I hope one thing everyone can agree with is that if this results in people not being incarcerated for having a small amount of unharmful drugs for their own use, particularly if that is disproportionately Black people, that is something we have to be thankful for as a byproduct of this new legislation that we've all voted on. Domination in politics looks like empire building, crushing anyone who stands in the way of an agenda, refusing to apologize for mistakes, and failing to accept the will of the people. Domination in society looks like one group, could be a racial group, an ethnic group, a professional group, an age group, overtly or subtly justifying exclusion or oppression on the basis of power. We do live in complex worlds where domination exists in nearly everywhere. Sometimes it's hard to spot it because it can wear a mask that looks like decency. The other big enemy for creative conflict is fear, which is actually according to Stanford Martin, the root of conflict. The fear of having your rights stripped away if you have ever felt powerless. The fear for a loved one's eternal soul if you believe in damnation. The fear of ignorance if you believe history repeats itself. The fear of not having enough if you've known what it's like to be hungry. The fear of being controlled if you believe institutions tend to oppose freedom. The fear of not being loved if you have been rejected in the past. The fear of national failure if you understand that even an empire like Rome can fall. And the fear of being wounded if you grasp the utter frailty of your human being. Some really interesting things there, I think. And maybe, you know, as I went through that list, you can identify, yeah, you know, I have a fear of this, and that kind of can be the power, the energy behind my anger or my staunch, inflexible beliefs about politics or society or religion. You know, it's good to examine not just what you believe, but why you believe it. And if fear is at the root of why you believe something, then there are probably some more helpful motivations and energies that you can be tapping into. So finally, for tonight, here's Stanford Martin on the two approaches to conflict. There's the one that she doesn't feel is particularly great, that it's fairly limited, and that is what we know as conflict resolution, which we all thought was great until we read Melody Stanford Martin, because she exposes this as being really kind of second best. It's based on this idea that conflict is bad, which it isn't necessarily. That the other side is my opponent or enemy. That we should agree and get along. That the highest priority is finding a solution that can solve the conflict. That the conflict should end. That anything making me feel uncomfortable and anxious is a bad thing, because those are bad feelings. That ambiguity is a sign of failure, because there has to be a one voice that we all coalesce around. And success means moving on, having, you know, conquered all of that's just happened. All right. That, I think, is very often how we go into conflict situations, with those sets of assumptions. And Melody Stanford Martin says, no, better than conflict resolution is conflict transformation. Conflict is not bad. It provides important opportunities to learn and grow. The other side is not my enemy, but my conversation partner and my fellow human. We should collaborate and create healthier ways of interacting. The highest priority is not finding an agreement, a solution, but in understanding each other and building stronger relationships. We should identify and disarm the destructive underlying cause of conflict and build something better. I am uncomfortable and anxious, but I won't let these feelings rule my contributions. And ambiguity, rather than being a sign of weakness, is actually a strength, because, you know, life isn't simple and we do need to hear many voices. And success is not just moving on, it is seeing with new eyes and creating a collaborative plan of action so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Okay, there's my input for this evening. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. So anybody want to unmute themselves and shoot anything down in flames that I've just said?
well, it's not shooting down in flames, but I guess I have a question on what she says or what you're feeling. If you know, this sounds like a good approach to take, but what happens if it's completely one-sided? You know, and you're going through this transformation, but the other person or the other side refuses to adopt the same viewpoint and is still looking at it in a different way. How does that work if it's one-sided?
Yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Have you got a real life experience of trying to be transformative and the other person just not being on the same page?
I don't, but I could expect that it would happen. And in an ideal world, I think, if the other side sees that this is the approach you're taking, that they will buy into that, and both will work in the same way. But I'm skeptical as to whether it would work in all cases. But maybe somebody else has some examples of that.
I don't have an example, but if someone is not willing to collaborate, which involves skills and an outlook, and if they don't have that, then I don't think this will work. I mean, it sounds wonderful, but you're going to have two people that buy into it to make it work, to continue what Bill was saying.
Yeah.
And if one person doesn't buy into it, it doesn't work. That's the whole problem.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid that we're getting, further and further on the political side from that being able to work. I mean, thinking back to what you were saying, before, in terms of people accepting things and truth and all. I mean, thinking of what's happening now, and the idea that this is unfair and that the whole system is not working correctly and votes are not, and it's very different from what the outcome was 20 years ago in 2000, when it really was, people could have looked at it as, this is not fair, I don't accept this, this is not, because it came down to a court decision on a few hundred votes in Florida. But 20 years ago, people were willing to say, yes, it might not be right, but it's the way things are, and we accept it, and we get behind it in a way that 20 years later, I'm not sure that people will on either side, depending upon how things come out. I think in those 20 years, something has changed, and I'm not sure how we can get back to the way things used to be. Not to sound too nostalgic about it, but it's, so some things have changed, and I'm not quite sure. I know, in the last few weeks, we've talked about what some of the causes might be of that, but this approach sounds good, but I'm not sure that it can overcome that
Right.
chasm.
I like that phrase, courageous conversations, or however that went, because I really think that that's the only way we're going to get past this. I might not like everything that's said, but at least I can understand what you're saying, and somehow we can do something that's not going to totally satisfy me, and you're not going to totally get your way, but we're going to take care of the world anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly, courage is huge in this, and there's a remarkable lack of courage in our public life right now.
I also think we need to move beyond just, your neighbor Kathy, that we need to stop bullying and treat each other like humans.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else anybody would like to say?
Hi. Yeah, I've had a struggle this past week actually with a person in my AA group, as it turns out. But we were talking about some personal things, and then politics entered the conversation, and it turns out she's on the other side. And I often listen to the to old music from the 60s. And there's a line, I think it's Crosby, Stills, Nash. I see from your coat, you're from the other side. And can I have some of your purple berries? I've been eating them for 6 or 7 weeks now. Haven't got sick once. And after the revelation of this person's politics, I really found myself struggling, really not respecting her, and just, as so often I have thought lately, how do you get there? How can you excuse the behavior? And she told me why she was supporting this person, but we're so far apart. And during the conversation, I said, I don't think that we're going to resolve anything. Neither one of us are going to change each other's opinion, which is not the goal. But I need to process this. I need to end the conversation. And for the next few days, I really, really struggled with it. And one of the things that AA teaches us, because it's groups of disparate people, but we have one big problem that if we don't solve, it means we're going to die. And sort of like this country right now, if we don't find a way to solve our differences, at least in some, not be the same, and I really do see our primacy in the world changing. It is not the same. It's not going to return to where it was. But I came down just to have my own peace of mind and that calm place within. AA taught me that love and tolerance is our code. So I need to love my sister. And it's really, what would Jesus, how would he think of this person? That's where I have to go to find a place where I can accept, begin to understand. I'm not saying that I'm going to get there quickly, but it's too easy to just say, okay, forget it. I'm done with you. And I have unfriended a few people in the past year, just because I think, that it's just intolerable, some of it. Love and tolerance, it's intolerable. So I don't have any solutions, but I know that I need to keep my name calling or categorizing has not helped me. And it puts me in a very place where I don't want to be. I don't want to live my life like that. So I don't know if we're going to solve this. I think it's, who knows, it's maybe 100-year problem. We've devolved so far. It's going to take some real digging over a long period of time, I think. I just don't think it's maybe not in my lifetime, I'm sad to say, to see. I think we can see progress. I still believe in progress, but boy, oh boy, it is exposed a lot of the, short-sightedness or bad thinking or lack of brotherly love. I don't have any answers, but that's been my experience in the last week, 2 weeks. I have to every day work at it.
Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. That's very helpful.
Well, it sounds like Nancy has been trying to listen to other people and understand how they got to the point that they're at, which is good. But to Bill's point, if other people are completely closed off from doing that, that doesn't help us. I still think there are more good people in the world than bad people. Unfortunately, it only takes a few bad people to completely throw the country off a cliff. So, which is depressing. But yeah, I intend to keep trying to listen to people and understand how they got to where they are. And your list of things people fear and things that that was good. I think I'm going to go find that book. So.
Good.
Yeah, I mean, I made a note of that, and I agree that there's, I think, my impression is that there's a lot of reasonable people. There's people who can, and I'm hopeful that I don't know whether these these things that you talked about tonight would work or not. The idea that that people can sort of meet and discuss things rationally. I mean, we've sort of devolved to the idea that, well, if you're not a true or far right conservative, then you must be socialist, and there's nothing in between, and you're one or the other, and there's nothing, there's no meeting in the middle on anything. And I think we all need to see what we can do to try to help us at least have the dialogue and realize that it's not black and white. There are shades of gray on a lot of things, but it's sort of devolved to the point where people see it as either good or evil, and there's nothing in between. And we need to work on what we can do to have a richer conversation about that.
I also think that one of the most evil things that has happened is that politicians are playing on people's fears. And that has happened in our history many, many times. And unfortunately, it always works.
Yes.
Because fear it can just invade someone's life until it takes over all aspects of how they look at the world. And it is just so terrible to have someone to have a group purposely play on people's fears. And I don't know how you try to fight that other than the other side patiently and over time pointing out that the fear you have is unjustified. But that is a very long, complicated process to try to accomplish that.
It's complicated now by, as we've talked about, by the fragmentation of media, where
right, social media plays on it.
Now I know people in my extended family who live in quiet suburban areas, but in the back of their minds they feel that oh wow, gangs are coming in and there's going to be people, storming their houses, when there's absolutely no evidence of that, but they hear this and it gets reinforced, and where we all used to see the same media, we don't anymore. And I think and I don't really understand exactly everything that they see on the other side, because I'm not watching that for the most part. And maybe I should watch more of that to understand what they're seeing. And ideally, they would see watch more of what I'm watching,
Right.
just understand
Right.
what I'm seeing. But again, I don't know what happens if it's all sort of one-sided. One side is willing to have this conversation and be courageous, and the other side is not.
Well,
And
I make a conscious effort.
Whichever side you're on. I mean, it's
Yeah, I make a conscious effort to listen to the other side in terms of what channels I watch and things like that, because I know I'm basically living in a bubble. You know, if you only read the New York Times and you only watch MSNBC, you know, you're living in a different world.
Mhm.
So.
All right. Thank you so much. That was stimulating. Very good. And thanks for joining these 4 weeks. And if you're watching on YouTube rather than on Zoom, I hope you found this of use, and you learned some things that you can now put into practice as you create meaningful and solid relationships with people across various divides. So God bless you, and I'll see you all again very soon for something else.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good
Good
night.
night.